I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step. We have a rocket scientist on the show today, Natalie Panek. She is 30 years old. She's from Canada. And she learned to fly a plane at 22. She's had a pretty aggressive path so far. She wants to be an astronaut. And when you discuss this with her, though, she says, no, I'm going to be an astronaut. Love the confidence there. And Natalie has an interesting path. She applied to NASA a couple times and had a unique experience that is definitely a why not now. I hope that you enjoy listening to Natalie, and we'll see you on the flip side. Before we hop into this episode, let me fill you in on a little secret of mine. That's Headspace. It's a guided meditation app, and I never imagined that doing something for 10 minutes a day could increase my quality of life so much. I've always struggled with knowing when to make things happen versus when to let things happen. Sometimes things go very well when I push on the gas, and sometimes not so much. It gets me into trouble. Headspace has helped me with learning how to trust my intuition. And I've tried meditation off and on for years. It's never stuck, but this time it has. I've made a very intentional shift in my morning routine, and that's to wake up, have my coffee, do Headspace, journal, and then I check my email, my social media, all of my devices. It's been a big shift, but great result. My aunt used to say, don't let anything rent space in your head for free. That's valuable real estate. Headspace allows me to be a much better landlord of my thoughts, especially first thing in the morning. You can go to headspace.com/why not now for a free trial. And if you stick around to the end of the show, I'll tell you how you can get a month for free. Welcome to the show, Natalie. I'm so excited to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we met through the interwebs, I believe. It was probably social media. I think I came across your presence and was just so impressed by the work that you've been doing and the journey that you've been on. Can you share a little bit about that with the listeners?
Sure. So my journey involves outer space. My long-term goal is to become an astronaut. I'm based out of Canada. And so I've been navigating my career and my journey with that long-term goal of space travel in mind. So I went through university pursuing degrees in mechanical engineering and aerospace engineering, decided to get my pilot's license for single-engine aircraft. I helped build and drove a solar-powered car across North America. And now I am working at a space robotics company, and we're the company that built the Canadarms that are on the International Space Station, if anyone's familiar with those.
Very cool. So you've just, done a thing or two. Really pretty impressive. I have so much I would love to talk to you about today. And to kick us off, though, in the spirit of true why not now fashion, is there something that comes to mind when you think about your career and knowing kind of the route you've taken? You've definitely really kind of gotten after it from an early age, to say the least. Is there something that comes to mind when you think about a time that you thought to yourself,
I want to do this. I want to do so-and-so. And maybe you were dragging your feet a little bit. And then all of a sudden it just clicked. You decided, I'm going to do this. And you went from want to action. And what did that look like? And how did it feel? And what was the day like?
So the moment that comes to my mind is more a realization that an opportunity was out there. So I'm from Western Canada, growing up in Calgary in the Rockies, and the dominant industry there is oil and gas. So it was kind of out of the norm to want to pursue a career in space in the aerospace industry. And I was looking for opportunities where I could do an internship or a placement or something along those lines. And online in my Google searches, I came across what was called a Space Exploration Scholarship through the Canadian Space Agency. And it was an opportunity for one Canadian student to attend a NASA academy for the summer. So as soon as I came across that, it was, you know what, why not? Let's just do this. Like, I have nothing to lose. I want to work at NASA. This could be a door opening experience. And so I put my application together and fired it off.
Wow. And when you did that, did you then just wait? Or what was your next step?
I did just wait. So it's an interesting story. And for the longest time, I didn't want to tell it because I was embarrassed that I had failed a number of times. And when I say failed, I mean that after that first initial application that I submitted, I was not selected for the program. And then I actually ended up applying for the program 3 more times after that. So 3 subsequent years. And I was not selected in each of those years. And it turns out on the last time that I applied, after I wasn't selected, I decided to just pick up the phone and call NASA's Office of Higher Education directly. And then within 2 minutes of that phone call, I was offered an internship position on the spot.
So when you decided to pick up the phone, this is fascinating. I mean, if we turned down several times, 4 times, and then you just thought, well, knowledge is power. Is that what you thought? And I'm going to figure out why so I can maybe change it in the future? Or what caused that moment for you to dial that number?
It was exactly just trying to get feedback and wondering if I needed to adjust my application differently or if there was experience or skill sets that I was missing in order to be selected for the opportunity. And it just happened that the selection process was shared between the Canadian Space Agency and NASA, and not everyone on the Canadian Space Agency side had selected me, but NASA was interested in my application, and everything kind of just fell into place over that phone call. So sometimes even when you take that why not step, it still requires perseverance and for you to go after it and kind of look failure and rejection in the eye.
That is such great advice. You why notted 4 times and then you ended up at NASA.
Exactly.
That is pretty amazing. And then was there a mourning period, though, before you made that call? Did you kind of have to pick yourself back up each time, or was it just really a more logical approach to this as far as I need the information so then I can make a change and then therefore I will be able to succeed in this area?
No, I think there were definitely emotions involved at least at the later stages. Like when I first applied, knowing that they only selected one Canadian and I was still early in my career, I think I was realistic about my chances of being selected. But then after you go through the process 2-3 times and you gain more experience under your belt, you have doubts like, is this an industry that I'm suited for? Do I have the capability to do it? And you kind of have to overcome that self-doubt and hesitation and just keep going after your dreams. And it's turned out well for me.
Do you yeah, it has. Do you think that they were surprised that you took the initiative to call and that was part of what they were looking for and why they wanted to have you join?
I've thought about that a lot, and I think for sure not everyone would pick up the phone and call. I honestly didn't think I would even catch someone on the other end. Like I was ready to leave a message or voicemail on a machine. And I mean, NASA was happy to have interns in the program and other participants. It's a little bit harder as a foreign national, as a Canadian, to go down and work at NASA. So that's why it was going through the Canadian Space Agency in the first place.
Yeah, so the feedback, though, the craving feedback is a skill or just a trait that I've heard even Olympians tell me, as far as, I once asked Julie Foudy, the soccer player, what is it that really has allowed you to succeed. And she said many things, but being coachable and aggressive in terms of a team being aggressive, not a person, are kind of the more normal things that I hear. But then I've also heard people say just that innate craving of feedback for improvement. And a lot of times people are fearful of that because they'll find out maybe what they weren't great at or that they need to improve on something. And being so open to that, to where you actually really need to have it and want to have it, is a huge upside, I think, that people can learn from you in this situation. And the pilot's license, when did this happen? And what was the moment that you decided, okay, that's it, I'm going to go after this?
So I was actually in university when I got my pilot's license. In Calgary, at the University of Calgary, when you're in the engineering program, you have an option to do an internship between your third and fourth years. So you take 16 months off and go work at a company, getting hands-on real-world experience. And I ended up working at an oil and gas company, and then realizing shortly after I had started it that this wasn't for me. I definitely wanted to go into the aerospace industry, and then thought about what other experiences I could be doing during that internship so it didn't feel like a loss or like I was wasting that 16 months. And so I had free evenings, free weekends, and I was making an income. So I thought it was the perfect opportunity just kind of to jump into the ground school and then the in-flight training.
And had you always thought about that growing up? That was part of your mission and dream, to space travel as well as fly?
Yeah, I think growing up, when I did, you didn't always have access to mentors, or I couldn't pick up the phone or email an astronaut and ask them how they got where they did. So just like in the research or seeing news stories, you learn that lots of astronauts are pilots or they're scuba divers, or seeing the experiences they have and trying to emulate your path along kind of what they've done, in the hopes of increasing your chances of one day being selected to go to space.
And we've had this discussion briefly about mentors in the past. It's a great segue. I'm a strong believer that more men need to mentor women because of just the sheer numbers of men having most of the power and influence when it comes to especially business and careers for women. That presence and that support from the male side is huge. Knowing most of my mentors, if not all of them, have been males, especially given the industry that you're in, space, technology, engineering, STEM. What are your thoughts on mentorship? And can you talk a little bit about some of your mentors and just how they've been able to help you?
Sure. So the one thing that I love about mentorship most of all is that it's really bi-directional. Like whether you're a mentor or a mentee in the relationship, you're going to be learning something from the other and gaining a different perspective. And I think that's really incredible. And like you mentioned, working in a non-traditional male-dominated industry, a lot of my champions have been men, just stepping up and encouraging me to pursue paths that I wouldn't have considered, or opportunities that I might not have been confident to pursue on my own. And I think you just really have to tap into those people and those resources who are going to elevate you and, again, be your champions and just encourage you to push your limits and your capabilities.
Absolutely. And are you mentoring anyone right now?
I am. So I have been involved in a program called Cyber Mentor for a number of years that runs out of the University of Calgary, where they pair young women with women already engaged in the tech and engineering industries. And you kind of just email back and forth over the course of a year. And the young women can ask questions about university or what scholarships they should be applying for, or just any sort of career advice that you can fire off in a text or over an email. It's really accessible for the young women involved in the program.
I love how technology is used like that, and you can connect. And speaking of the future of where everything is going, and we hear about these, self-flying cars and artificial intelligence. Given that you are right in this world of robotics and space robotics nonetheless, what are some of your thoughts about the theories and the controversies of AI, how quickly it's moving, the potential of it really impacting the economy and also jobs. What are some of your takeaways or just overlying thoughts on where this is headed?
I mean, I think for the most part, this type of technology is going to maybe move faster than people are comfortable with. It takes time to adjust to change, and like you said, it's going to impact the economy and other aspects. And I think ultimately, it's going to be a question of how we can use and harness technology for good, and how we make sure it stays on a path for good rather than being turned into negatives. And I think it's a matter of communicating and informing the public so that they're aware of how the technology works. And being able to communicate that effectively is hard. Like, it's hard for the public to understand the complexity often that's behind these technologies and help them see the value in it.
And are you seeing stunted growth or accelerated growth due to laws or lack of laws? How does the legal world kind of come into this, especially for your area of robotics?
Oh, that's really interesting. I don't know that I have the depth and the breadth to answer from a legal perspective. An example I can give you is on the topic of satellite servicing. So one of the ideas that the company I work for has looked into is repairing satellites that have broken down in orbit or run out of propellant using robotic arms. And there's a whole bunch of legal complexities associated with that because there are no governing laws in space that mandate satellite manufacturers need to take care of their satellites at the end of life. So right now they just become space debris. They'll either stay in their orbit or they'll become space junk or deorbit after a number of years. But there's no like United Nations level overarching governing organization that mandates what happens in space. So I think to some degree you need those laws in place and those regulations to make sure that we are protecting the places we explore. But like you said, you don't want those laws and legal frameworks to hinder progress and advancements with technology. It's where do you walk the line, I guess?
You are at that's such cutting edge that there are no rules, right? Kind of back to
nobody's done it before or thought long term about what's going to happen to the orbital environment around Earth and what we need to have in place to make sure that we can explore beyond orbit, and it's not going to be like the movie Gravity where you have all this debris destroying your International Space Station and causing chaos.
So is it just a culture of asking, not necessarily asking forgiveness instead of permission, but trying to walk the side of ethical, even because there are no boundaries, there really aren't any guardrails. How is it decided what happens and what doesn't happen?
I don't know if I have an answer to that question. I mean, money is a big driver in that too. It costs a lot of money to do something to your satellite to deorbit or clean up the orbital environment. I mean, yeah, I don't know how you get to that point where you have these mandates in place. Maybe it needs to be that first company that steps up and says, we're going to be the first in the world to do this and set a precedent and take that leadership role and saying we need to start doing this, and then other people follow.
And it's interesting, it's chicken egg type of conversation, what comes first, but also a true definition of being a renegade. You are in these seats. And bringing it back to Earth for a second, the conversation. So I follow you on Instagram, and you're one of my favorite people to just be inspired by because you're constantly hiking and traveling and exploring these incredible places. And just for everyone's knowledge and the listeners here, how can people find you on Instagram?
Yeah, so I'm at Natalie_Panek. You can look for rocket scientist in my description, and that'll be me, literally.
That's, no big deal. You can just look for the rocket scientist. I love that. So with these places that I see you going to, do you have a favorite location that you've explored? I mean, I see these sand dunes and these huge glaciers and these mountains, and what's your favorite?
I would definitely have to say I did in northern Canada to Baffin Island. There's a beautiful national park called Auyuituk, and I hiked a 100-kilometer pass through this river valley surrounded by mountains. And Canada's a large country. It's hard to get around, and not many people have explored the northern Arctic regions. And I would love if more Canadians got to explore our own backyard, and North America even too. Like, we have so much stunning geography and history here to discover.
And have you ever run into some scary situations, whether it be animals or weather? Do you have any stories?
Definitely weather is a big one. Like, when you're hiking in the mountains, the weather can turn at any moment. When I was on that Ikshayik Pass I just talked about, there were a number of major river crossings that we had to do, and we had some questionable moments. On one of the crossings, I actually fell in and ended up floating a bit down the river, lost my trekking poles and some of my other gear, got soaking wet, but it all turned out well in the end. That one, there were also polar bears, so we didn't see any polar bear, but we ended up crossing tracks, which was enough for me. Take a picture of the track and keep moving.
And when you're traveling, are you going usually with a group of people, or who do you travel with?
Typically, it's my boyfriend. We do a lot of backcountry camping and hiking, and then I've done some solo trips as well. Like, I went to Alaska on my own out of university, just didn't have anyone to travel with at the time, and I thought, you know what, why not? Let's just go rent a car and tour around. It was beautiful.
That's cool. That's cool. And okay, back to the aspirations of being an astronaut. When that happens, because it will. It's not a matter if, it's a matter of when. Tell us about that process. So once again, you have to, I imagine, apply, but what does that look like? How often do you apply, and when will you know, and how can we get you up there quicker?
That's an interesting question, especially as a Canadian. So it would come through our Canadian Space Agency. They would put out a call for astronauts. And just for perspective, they had a call for astronauts in 1983, I believe, 1992, and then 2009. So we actually only have 2 active astronauts right now who are both men, and they probably won't fly to space station for a few more years. So depending on when the space agency would put out another call, you would apply online, and they would have a number of filters that you'd go through before they select their final astronauts.
Wow. So if you were to relocate somewhere else, would there be more likelihood that you could become an astronaut?
Probably not. I believe they require citizenship. If I moved and became a U.S. citizen or something.
Wow, that's interesting. So there have only been 3 since 1983.
Well, sorry. So we've had, I believe, a dozen, but there's only 2 that are active right now.
And given that you are a woman in this world, what are some of your key takeaways, having navigated now for quite some time in this industry, space, robotics, engineering? As someone who is younger, definitely young, and in this unique spot, what have you learned that other people could really learn from?
I think perseverance is my number one go-to advice and takeaway is keep going, even if you get rejected. And I always think, like, the people who reviewed my application for that NASA position probably haven't given me a second thought to this day, but I will never forget the experience that I had. One other thing I like to do is always try to align towards peak moments in my life. So peak moments are times when you're fully challenged and you feel like you have resources in place to succeed. And a lot of identifying your peak moments is getting that feedback and feeding it forward into future goals and growth. So once you have feedback, you have to do something with it in order to, I think, transition to your next steps.
That's great advice.
Yeah, like, we can't change the past, but we can shape the future and use the feedback we get in order to achieve our dreams. So I'm constantly reevaluating and evaluating where I am in my life and trying to position myself towards those peak moments in my life. And then I would say just embrace failure. Usually when you're working on projects, whether you're in a startup or working in tech or engineering, things are going to go wrong, 100% guaranteed. So you kind of just have to take what you learn from that failure and figure out how to improvise and make decisions on the fly in order to get to those next steps.
Got it. And I love that. The peak moments and when you're fully challenged and you have the right resources lined up. So when you said resources, I imagine that's support. It could be financial,
Mentors.
There's that quote, I can't remember who said it, but a vision without resources is hallucination, which is actually kind of true. But that's great advice. I think, there's so much, there's a unique point of view, obviously, that you have, and it's great to see that you're sharing your view and your opinions, especially in such a dynamic time when it comes to robotics and the future of technology being the future of humanity, really. So just changing gears here to another why not now type of question. This is more forward thinking. So is there something that you've been considering doing that you haven't done yet and you haven't made up your mind yet, or something that maybe provides a perfect opportunity for you to ask yourself, well, why not now? And let's talk that through a little bit.
So one thing that I've wanted to do for a while now, and I think would be so interesting, would be to get more involved in like science communication and maybe doing a TV show. I feel like it would be a really cool platform to kind of put myself out there in that space and let young people realize that, hey, you can be a woman who's knows how to fly a plane and she's driven a solar car and she thinks science and tech is so cool, and kind of have, I just think that would be really cool.
I love it. So what could we do to talk through the first steps in you taking that on? Have you thought about that, or is it more of still waiting to make the full decision? Because it seems like you're the type of person that when you decide to do something, you're getting after it.
Well, I think for this, it would be more like how do you merge doing something like that with, say, a full-time job? Like if you have multiple passions, how do you make them both happen?
Mm-hmm. And I've mentioned this once before, but there's a book called The Originals by Adam Grant, and actually he will be coming on the podcast soon. He talks a lot about that. He talks about companies like Warby Parker, who, these three guys were all getting ready to finish up college. They had these awesome job opportunities and offers, and they didn't just, risk everything and try to go out and do this new thing. They did have their parallel with their existing job and have that comfort and that income. So I think, as much as we might hear at times people just jump into a completely different thing or take a big risk, a lot of times it's more calculated than we would think. And with your situation right now and having something, the fortunate thing is that it's aligned with science is the common theme regardless, right? So there may be a way to, this is just a thought starter, but to include your current company and or partners of that company to where it could be perceived as a part of your job. Might be one way to think about it. And if that's not a possibility, I would say starting to talk to people who are like-minded and or find a counterpart in the TV production or communications field that might be interested in just talking through what a game plan could look like or roll out. And if there's anyone listening that thinks that they might have some help in this area to help Natalie with her why not now of finding a way to explore the science communication kind of platform through TV or whatever medium, please reach out to me and I will make sure to connect you. Or you can find Natalie on Twitter. You can find her all over online. So let's kind of use that as an open invitation as well.
Oh, that's perfect.
We're just going to call the world and see how we can get this done, because what I'm envisioning is this would just be so amazing. I used to watch Mr. Wizard when I was younger, and it was this show on Nickelodeon, and I loved it. It was this man who would just go in and do science, and he would have these beakers and things would blow up in his lab. And I'm not suggesting that's exactly it, but what a strong, amazing role model for boys and girls and men and women to see you navigate through this profession and your daily journey. It could just be very, very powerful. So, and it would be so cool if people could tune into that and be just as interested versus The Bachelorette or the Kardashians. Exactly. So I'm all for it. We'll get this figured out. I'm going to give it some more thought, but at least we've put it out there. And just a few kind of rapid fire questions to wrap up. Favorite book, or is there something that you're reading right now that you're really enjoying?
Right now, I'm reading a book called The Right Kind of Crazy by Adam Steltzner, and it is about the entry, descent, and landing system of the Curiosity rover on Mars. And I think it's just fascinating to think or learn about how the Jet Propulsion Laboratory landed this rover on Mars, and the parallels to my own job as we're building hardware for the European Space Agency's ExoMars rover right now.
Wow. Okay, yes, we need a TV show for you so you can explain all of these things to us and we can get just as excited. It sounds like a science fiction type of scene that you just described. Is there anything that keeps you up at night?
For me, it's often thinking about going back to Calgary and how I can get home. I had to kind of move away from all my family and everything I love to pursue this dream of space. And I'm constantly thinking about how I can merge my love of my work and my love of family and landscape and the mountains together.
And last question here, what advice would you give to your younger self?
The advice I would give to my younger self is don't worry what other people think or compare yourself to others. Evaluate your journey and your path based on your own capabilities and your own capabilities alone. And I think that's especially true now in this social media dominant world that we live in, where it's so easy to compare ourselves to the people we see on Instagram or Twitter, but life isn't like Instagram, which is often choreographed, and you're seeing the perfect realities of people. So just stay true to yourself.
I can't thank you enough. It's so fun to follow and see, what's coming next for you. And let's definitely stay in touch. And hopefully we will have some things to follow up soon on. But we'll talk to you next time. And thanks so much for your time, Natalie.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you're inspired by Natalie, make sure you follow her on Instagram because she has some pretty wild adventures and her exploring skills are top notch. So follow her at Natalie_Panek, Panek, and enjoy. I love the fact that Natalie kept at it with the NASA program. She was rejected not once, not twice, but 4 times, and then called to find out why, not thinking that she'd actually even get to talk to anyone. But she did, and then learned she was actually toward the top of the applicants, and she got that slot. That's pretty inspiring. There's a theme that I've noticed when it comes to why not nows with the past few guests, and that's to pick up the phone. Sometimes we just have to pick up the phone for ourselves. And in this case with Natalie, she was calling to see why she was rejected from NASA, and she ended up getting accepted. And with Dr. Jen Welter, the first NFL female coach, she actually called on her own behalf. She picked up the phone. So it might be something to think about if you're running into roadblocks, or if you're not sure how to get your name in for something. Call yourself, recommend yourself, refer yourself as yourself or maybe as someone else. But that's an interesting theme that I think is definitely a game changer, and at least it has changed the path for the last few guests. Okay, let's talk books for just a moment. Shelfie Club update. I am reading Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. This is a memoir. J.D. grew up in the Appalachian area, Rust Belt area in America, and he talks about his values and his upbringing and their relation to the social problems in his hometown, but across the nation. And it's highly relevant at this time because of the recent election. The interesting thing about this book, and it was referred to me by Mindy Finn, who was one of the vice presidential candidates, who was on the show recently, it gives you a whole nother light onto topics that you, and things that you may not have considered. So when we hear people on the news, or we hear this concept of there being a bubble in America, and it's just such a separation and divide, of course, given the election results, I think this book really helps us understand a little bit more. And with myself, having moved from an urban area to a rural area in the last 6 months, I've personally witnessed this bubble effect. And in the real world, as well as the virtual world, we see kind of that social media echo chamber concept also in play. But now that I live in this rural, very conservative area, and historically have lived in more liberal urban areas, I see these bubbles, and I also can see both sides. After having conversations with people, I realize we're not actually that far apart on a lot of different issues. But this book, in a way, I think helps us understand and have a bit of a bridge to the other side of the bubble, regardless of where you are. Because JD, he grew up, had this experience, very typical experience according to him for his area, and then went on to become an attorney. And he has what he calls a privileged life and lives kind of in a different land now, if you will. So I encourage you to pick up the book. It's not about whether or not you believe or agree. It's all about, in my opinion, learning another point of view, learning about an area that maybe you don't know that much about. So take a look, Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. It's also on the Shelfie Club webpage, amyjomartin.com/Shelfie Club, and use the hashtag Shelfie Club to let me know what you're reading. I'm going to be looking for a new book soon because I'm almost done with this one. I want to hear what your Why Not Now is. Please share it with me on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at Amy Jo Martin. I'll send a signed copy of my New York Times best-selling book, Renegades Write the Rules, to the first 200 people who listen, rate, and leave an honest review of the podcast in iTunes. And you'll also get a free month subscription from our friends at Headspace. This is only available to Why Not Now listeners. Once you've left a rating and review on iTunes, just email your iTunes handle name and your mailing address to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com, and we'll get your package in the mail to you. For detailed show notes, head to amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. That's where you'll find links to things we discussed on the show, special offers, and how you can keep in touch with guests. Hat tip to my buddies Ash and Devin at Rock Salt Music for our tunes today. You just listened to the talented John Coggins in Let's Go and Let It Ride. And a jump high five to my talented husband, Richard Greer, for producing the show and being patient with me. See you next time. Until then, why not now?